Noam Chomsky is, of course, a legend who has contributed to many different fields, actually psychology, father of modern linguistics, and also, of course, to politics and political theory and political analysis and political science. And so he actually did an interview with the Tribune mag, and he talked about, and this is something that's really crucial to Noam Chomsky. You guys know we're going to talk about manufacturing consent, but he says the reason why Sanders is vilified in the media pretty much across the spectrum is not so much because of his policies. It's because he has inspired a mass popular movement which doesn't just show up every 4 years to push a button, but is acting constantly, pressuring to achieve changes and having some success. That's frightening for the business class. The role of the public is to be passive spectators and not to interfere. Now, basically he's just trying to say that he's vilified in the media because he sparked this movement. A big thing that people always talk about is how Bernie Sanders has sparked a movement, right? He's the only candidate who actually has his own movement. And so what we've seen is, and this is really relevant today, Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent is actually incredibly relevant today. And the reason for that is simply because, his explanation of basically how the mainstream media wields all of the power, right? Especially in this plutocracy in which the mainstream media is controlled by the plutocracy, is controlled by rich people, okay? It's controlled by the way, the 1996 Telecommunications Act, signed into law by Bill Clinton, completely was the nail in the coffin and killed mainstream news media, because what ended up happening was a bunch of regulations were pulled, and so after that 96 telecommunications bill, all these caps and prevented mergers were removed, and so there were massive mergers. Now 6 conglomerates own 90% of all of news media. And so when you hear that, you understand why there's like this collusion going on. You see MSNBC silencing any dissent towards the Democratic Party. It is always trying to undermine Bernie Sanders. You see in the clip of Steve Kornacki where the guy in his ear starts telling him to stop when he's pointing out the fraudery of the Iowa Democratic Party. There was that one guy who's reporting on how Bernie's doing well in Nevada, and then boom, his audio cuts off. So basically, you've got this manufacturing consent situation going on where the media creates the narrative, and that's what controls everything. And so this election cycle has made me realize more than anything that the media is honestly the most powerful thing, because it controls what goes on here. It controls what everyone thinks. So if after Nevada, Bernie Sanders wins by 26 points, but you don't do all that much of like positive coverage or fawning coverage of him, that's not going to have as much of an effect as Joe Biden winning in South Carolina by 26 points, and then your coverage of him is 3 times as positive, and you gift him $100 million in free advertising. Okay, it's $100 million. They did the same thing for Donald Trump, by the way. I think they had gave him billions, actually, of free advertising. So when you do that, I mean, you are controlling the narrative. And so they controlled the narrative. So the mainstream media put it in people's heads that Joe Biden had this massive comeback, and he was inevitable to win. And then the establishment, who's also part of the plutocracy and is also tethered to that whole system, comes out, coalesces behind Joe Biden right before Super Tuesday. And so all of these different organizations are sort of all tethered in one, whether you read Chomsky or you read Ralph Nader, in his book about breaking through power, It's Easier Than You Think, or whether you read Peter Phillips and Giants. All of them explain that basically we live in a plutocracy. The plutocracy owns the media, which controls the narrative. And that is, there's the transnational capitalist class, and then, which is a small group of people who are basically CEOs of these companies, CEOs of companies that are basically trying to override national sovereignty in favor of higher profits, don't care about human rights and stuff like that. And then you've got news networks who are owned by these conglomerates who basically, if you don't say what the plutocracy wants to say, you're not going to be hired. And then that's where everyone gets their news media from. That's why alternative media is becoming so popular now, and hopefully it takes off even more. Hopefully millions more people start going to YouTube for their news, because mainstream media is not doing a good job. In fact, they're doing a horrible job. So what Noam Chomsky is talking about here is absolutely correct, and I wanted to go back to his manufacturing consent because it's so insanely relevant today that it's honestly a little bit crazy. And the mainstream media has really dominated this race, the narratives that come with this race, and all of that comes with this race, and it's just pretty crazy to see, man. It's pretty crazy to see.